Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. J-Lamb Bio here. We are going to wrap up our ecology unit by talking a little bit about conservation ecology. Yes, we'll talk a little bit about the environment itself. What are some issues with the environment where humans are having a negative impact, and what can we do to help protect the environment to ensure that it exists for a long time after we are gone. So by the end of this video, you should be able to understand how life on Earth is interconnected. We've talked a lot about how organisms interact with one another, and we're going to continue that conversation today. You should be able to explain the differences between different biomes that exist on Earth. So we've touched on this previously, but we'll dive a little bit deeper as we get into the video. And you should also be able to analyze a variety of factors that contribute both positively and negatively to climate and ecosystems. Again, quite a few vocab words here. We're going to talk about biosphere, climate, weather, photic zone, aphotic zone, pollution, renewable resources, biomes, non-renewable resources, and acid rain. So we've discussed a little bit about the biosphere. The biosphere, bio meaning life, and sphere referring to the Earth. The biosphere is all parts of Earth where life exists. And we can break this down even further into the hydrosphere, which is where water exists. The atmosphere, which refers to the gas that surrounds the planet that allows us to breathe, and the geosphere, which refers to the Earth surface itself. So lots of different things go into the biosphere, and there's lots of different possible ecosystems based on what goes on in each of these three spheres. One thing that makes a big difference in the different types of ecosystems that exist on Earth is the concept of climate. And then we also need to address the concept of climate versus weather. Climate is long-term weather conditions. So a climate is something like a desert would be warm or hot and dry. That is the climate. The weather is short-term atmospheric conditions. So when we refer to things like climate change, we're referring to the gradual changes in the amount of temperature and precipitation over a very long period of time. Whereas weather is simply short-term atmospheric conditions. So there's a significant difference between climate, long-term, versus weather, which is short-term. Now, the variety of biomes that exist on Earth are based off of two key concepts, temperature and precipitation. A lot of the biomes that exist on this Earth are very similar across the globe. So for example, a temperate forest in the United States would be very similar to a temperate forest in Europe. But all of these are based on the amount of temperature and precipitation that these different biomes have. So for example, the tundra has very, very cold temperatures and very low precipitation, whereas the tropical rainforest has very high precipitation and very high amounts of temperature. So a lot of these different biomes you see across different continents, and that's simply because they share the same temperature and precipitation. When we talk about marine systems, we really break them down into two different places. We break them down into the photic zone and the aphotic zone. The root photo simply refers to light. So the photic zone is the area of a marine ecosystem that is exposed to light. And here you would see photosynthetic plants. In the aphotic zone, you would not see any sunlight. There is no sunlight in the aphotic zone, so you would not see any plants. There are some bacteria that may exist in this area, but they would perform a process known as chemosynthesis, where they would break down chemical compounds that exist from the little volcanic eruptions that may occur in the bottom of the ocean. So keep in mind when we talk about the resources that are available in an ecosystem, we have two types. We have renewable resources that can be used at the same rate at which it is replaced, and non-renewable resources. Renewable resources would include things like solar energy, hydroelectric power, wind, and geothermal energy. Non-renewable resources are used faster at the rate which they are formed and will eventually run out, such as fossil fuels, coal, nuclear power, and natural gas. These are not replaced very quickly or very readily and will eventually run out. Now, pollution is a really big issue with the environment. That is something undesirable that is added to the environment. A major component of this is the burning of fossil fuel to put hydrogen sulfide and carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and that can cause lots of problems for different plants and animals. One resulting problem from this is something known as acid rain, which is rain with a relatively low pH, and acid rain can completely defoliate a forest. That means get rid of all of the leaves, thus preventing the vegetation from growing. Since vegetation is in the bottom of the food chain, that can have drastic impacts on other organisms that rely on the plants in that environment for survival. The greenhouse effect is something that you've probably heard of quite a bit before, and that is due to the environment, the loss of heat and energy from the sun is decreased. The atmosphere helps retain some of the heat that the sun provides for the earth. When we increase the amount of carbon dioxide levels, this increases the ability for the atmosphere to retain that heat. Thus, you see larger increases in temperature over long periods of time. That is known as the greenhouse effect. So what we take a look at here are trends in global temperatures. And over the last 100 years, the temperature has increased 1.3 degrees Fahrenheit, which doesn't seem like it is a drastic change. However, small increases in temperature can actually have a very large impact on the environment. It is this concept of global warming. The data here does not lie. Now keep in mind, when we talk about global warming, we are referring to climate. Weather is the day in, day out temperature. And so we hear a lot of times that when there's really, really cold snap or really cold weather that, haha, we wish we had global warming. But the fact of the matter is, if we take the average temperature of all of the places on Earth over the past couple calendar years, they've been some of the hottest on record. Now, whether that's due to human issues or environmental issues, there's still some debate available for that. I personally like to think it's somewhat of both factors. But when we take a look at some of this data, some of this information, it can be quite alarming and can have a significant impact on the ecosystems in which we live. Lastly, we're going to go through the concept of biomagnification, that is, the amount of pollutants accumulate in greater numbers as you go up in a food chain. So DDT, for example, is used as a common insecticide, and when it runs off into streams, it can be very problematic. So if we take a look at plankton, plankton would only have 0.4 parts per million, so relatively small. But as we go up the food chain, the amount of DDT increases because they're eating many of the individuals that are below it in the food chain, and thus the pollutants accumulate to higher numbers, which can be very, very problematic and very deadly for organisms towards the top of the food chain. The concept of habitat fragmentation is very common as well. When we build interstates or when we build highways, we break apart a habitat into small pieces. Now what they've been doing is they actually create these bridges known as habitat corridors, which allow organisms to be able to safely cross the path of the highway from one place to another. An invasive species is problematic as well, as it is an organism that is not native to the environment, which means that it doesn't really fit into the food chain or food web, and typically these organisms reproduce very rapidly due to no natural predators. On the right hand side here you see an example of kudzu, a plant that was brought over from Japan in order to spruce up the areas near nations' highways. Unfortunately, this had no natural predators and nothing ate it, so it simply just took over the area and started preventing trees that are native to the environment from getting enough sunlight to be able to perform photosynthesis. These invasive species are huge problems, and there's tons of stories about this, whether it be the cane toad from Australia, the kudzu, the zebra mussel. There's a ton of examples that we will talk about as a class related to invasive species. So again, just to keep in mind, there are many threats to our environment which have devastating effects on our ecosystem, which will make the word of the video. Let's go with ecosystem. Again, ecosystem is your word of the video. Through simple conservation, we can ensure that our environment remains stable in the future. It doesn't take a lot to take care of our environment, and it's very important that we do so to ensure that we don't disrupt food chains, food webs, and ensure that our environment is safe for many years to come. We'll talk a lot more about this when we get back to class, and this is the last major video for the year for biology, so we may come back and touch up on a few things with some different videos here, but this is the last big video you're going to have. Have a great day, guys. I appreciate your time. Have a great year, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.